Two things are on my mind right now. First off, Maria wanted me to share a little bit about our work, which I'm happy to do. Particularly for the people who wouldn't know it, I'm assuming in an audience like this, some people are quite familiar with all the work on systems thinking and organizational learning for, 25 years since the fifth discipline, but it was actually much longer ago that the work started. And then secondly, some of my reflections on the theme here. I'll start with the latter because I guess the simplest way I can say it is I feel I have a very complex personal relationship with technology. I've been at MIT for a long time. So if you're a place like MIT, guess what? Massachusetts Institute of... my mentor was the guy who actually led the team at MIT who built the first digital computer. He's quite famous in the history of technology. He invented core memory. Core memory was the first big breakthrough, patented breakthrough that led to modern digital computation. They didn't just invent it. They didn't just do laboratory work. They supervised the construction and installation of the first 27 digital computers, general-purpose digital computers ever built. They were installed to coordinate the first North American air defense system. This is in 1952, 53. They were actually being installed. The team of MIT graduate students supervised not only the design, prototyping, but the manufacture and installation of these. Of a company did the work, but the MIT team actually supervised the company. The company was a little operation called IBM. That's how IBM got in the computer business. They were the contractor for this MIT team. So I'd grown up with this. Now, that was way before my time, and by the time I met him, his name is Jay Forrester. You can see a whole floor of the Smithsonian History of Technology Museum in D.C. in Washington devoted to this project. It's quite historic. By the time I'd met him, he'd left the field of digital computation entirely. I think he was all of 35 years old. The project was done. He had previously invented radar, so he has quite a history as an inventor. And he said, I've done all the technology stuff I want to do. It's not really the big issue. Now, keep in mind, I'm referring to conversations I heard with Jay in probably the early 70s when I'm a beginning graduate student at MIT. But just interesting to put it in the context of today. He said, having been there at the forefront of technology, his view is, he was convinced that it was actually not the frontier at all that people thought it was. That it was he said it was almost more like a production process. And what he meant by that, if you put enough money and people into any field of technology, sure, there's ups and downs and there's unpredictability, but you can be pretty confident that you'll have some output, some progress at the other end. And his view, and this was his words, and I'll relate this to the topics you were all exploring together here. It was his words that the real frontier was understanding our human systems, not technology. Understanding this extraordinary web of interconnectedness we have woven around the world, really over the past 200 or 300 years. And obviously what we call technology today is mostly what used to be called IT, information technology, and now we just call it technology. But of course, this is technology. Everything, all of the artifacts in our world, all the different tools we use are technically all technology. And I don't think Jay really used this term, but then as I studied different people's thinking about this a long time ago, a phrase gradually crystallized, which made a lot of sense to me, that we live in the machine age. That was a term actually that a man named Lewis Mumford, a historian, wrote about extensively, the age of the machine. Technology is the machine. Another way to say the same thing. All these machines. Now, we don't even use that term machine as much as we used to. This term technology is taken over everything. And I think there's a lesson in that too. These are all machines. Right? There's a technical term in the world of biology. Because, it's actually, interestingly, only in the last really 2 or 3 decades has the field of biology wrestled with a very simple question. but you might say is like right at the heart of biology. Like, what's life? What's a living system versus a non-living system? You might think that, that would be like right at the heart of what the field of biology is all about. But in fact, if you looked at the 19th century, most of biology is studying a lot of dead things. Well into the 20th century, the specimens and all the, botanist collections of butterflies and all that stuff. Not really studying the phenomenon of life. But today in biology, there is kind of a consensual definition, and it's really useful to reflect on this relative to, quote, technology or machines. The two terms that are distinguished are what's called autopoietic versus allopoietic. So autopoiesis is now considered one of the technical definitions of a living system. The word poiesis, Greek, same root as our word poem or poetry, create. Autopoiesis, self-creating. Self-creating. A living system creates itself. This system is continually recreating itself. The longest lived cells in the human body are like around 7 years or so. A lot of the cells literally live a few hours, like a lot of the epidural cells are very, very short-lived. So literally within 7 years, the entire system is replaced. Literally. It's not metaphoric, it's literal. It's how the living system works. The contrast is called allopoietic, created by another. So the technical definition in the systems world today between a living system and a non-living system, that is to say, for example, a machine, is a living system is self-created. A machine is created by another, allopoietic. Certainly one of the oldest themes for the last 50 years, maybe longer, 70 years, in science fiction has been how the machines are gradually taking over. Right? You see that in so many science fiction stories and movies, this kind of gradual encroachment. And actually, I love the term used by another important mentor for me, a man named Humberto Maturana, very eminent biologist, Chilean. Humberto with an H. Maturana, Maturana. Not very well known, except outside the world of biology and in his home country of Chile, where he's written a lot of non-technical books, almost all of which are in Spanish. Humberto actually originated the term autopoiesis versus allopoiesis. And Humberto has a very deep appreciation of the living and the social reality. So he's basically a biologist, coincidentally, another MIT guy. He did his postdoc work at MIT in a very famous project that eventually won a whole bunch of people Nobel Prizes. He had by that time returned to Chile because he really wanted to be at home with his own people. So he actually wasn't one of the recipients of the Nobel Prize, but he was one of the postdocs who did the research. Very famous for what's called the Santiago Theory of cognition. Now, I know all this may sound a little technical. I hope not too much. I'll try to wrap it up and kind of bring it back to our theme here. I think we're in a time where reflection, and I really appreciate that theme as it popped up in many, many people's comments, the role of reflection, the role of parenting. You might say the role of the whole human context for the use of technology is really where all the important issues lie. So I think we're in a time where we cannot really spend too much time reflecting on what the heck do we mean by a machine or technology versus a living system. So Humberto is especially famous in biology, not only for the theory of autopoiesis, but for the theory of what's called the Santiago de Chile, the Santiago Theory of cognition. And it's a beautiful way to appreciate the difference between the cognition of that device, I'm not pointing at you, I'm pointing at the camera she's using to record, and the cognition or perception or awareness of us as living systems. So the essence of the theory, the Santiago Theory of cognition, is that human beings do not perceive their reality. That's a dangerous oversimplification. We do not simply passively take in sensory data from the world around us and record it, sort of like a camera. You imagine, the old camera with the reverse image in the back of the camera. There is something like that literally going on in the eye, of course, but that's just the physical part of perception. So Humberto would say, we do not perceive the world we see the world we perceive. We do not simply perceive the world we see the world we know how to perceive. A woman experiences a different world than a man. A salesperson sees a different world than an engineer. A Chinese person experiences a different world than a Western person, and on and on and on. Our perception is a reflection of our history. That's the characteristic of a living system. It's not the characteristic of that camera. That camera records information, and obviously electronically can store it and all kinds of stuff. Human beings do not work that way. It's very important to understand that. It's one of the cornerstones of this emerging understanding of living systems. And I feel a little bit like you all in that, just as kind of paradoxically, the more we understand the practical challenges of technology with our kids, the more it brings it back to us. Our relationships, our engagement, the wealth of adult relationships with kids, as opposed to the technology itself, our ability to reflect. Well, similarly, the more we understand the difference between a living system and a machine, the more we see it really is fundamentally different, but in very subtle ways. So just to make sure you understand what I said a minute ago. So I'm going to give you an assignment. I'm not really going to give it, but imagine. I'd like you to write down verbatim what I said in the last 5 minutes. So we all laugh because it's kind of a ludicrous idea. But it's exactly what, of course, that machine can do. It records exactly what happened over the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. But if I asked you to write down what you've been thinking and feeling the last 5 minutes, you have no difficulty whatsoever. So there are, I don't know the number, let's just say 150 or 200 realities in this room right now. Literally. Not metaphorically. Literally. The living system interacts with its environment so as to bring forth something, let's say in a species like us, called awareness. As Humberto would say, we create a reality. Again, that's not metaphoric. That's as close as we can describe to the literal processes of perception or cognition. We bring forth a reality. Now, when you start to ponder this, it has absolutely profound impacts for the social domain, the world of relationships. And without understanding this, I would say we're in a very fragile state vis-a-vis how we get on with each other, how we work together, how we build teams, how we just simply understand each other. How many of you have ever been in a conflictual situation where someone pointed out something you had said that was part of the problem, and your reaction was, I didn't say that. Right? But now, the person just said, well, when you said, did you realize how difficult that was for the other people? But the person doesn't say, at that point in time, my listening led me to hear you saying this. You with me? But that would obviously be a much more technically correct way to say it. Since we aren't passively recording, we're interacting with our reality and bringing forth something called awareness. But it's each of us bringing that forth. And if we get into a complicated situation where there really is some conflict, I'm assuming that's a real situation for each and every one of us in the room, whether it's part of your management team in your school or what goes on in your classroom or just relationships amongst teachers or relationships between parents and teachers or whatever. The world of human relationships is a world of conflict by its nature. I don't use conflict now in a negative sense or pejorative. I just simply mean different systems with different realities interacting. And sometimes interacting in very problematic ways. So here's another one of Humberto's kind of withering insights. When one human being tells another human being what is real, like, have you ever noticed yourself saying, hey, don't you see what's really going on here? Or at least maybe that might not be too polite, and you Canadians are, of course, terribly polite. Just thinking in your mind, geez, what's wrong with her? Doesn't she see what's happening? So it could be either expressed or implicit. when one human being tells or in their own mind says what is real to another, what they are actually doing is making a demand for obedience. That's the quote. When one human being tells another what is real, what they are actually doing is making a demand for obedience. Because we are asserting implicitly that I have a privileged view of reality. I see what's real, you see something delusional. And it's my job to help correct you. Hence the demand for obedience. So when we start to appreciate the real nature of human perception as a living system, it has huge implications for how we get on with each other, how we work together. When a group of people working together can really be grounded, the traditional word for this, by the way, would be humility. I really don't see everything that's going on. I know I don't see everything that's going on. You know, what do you see that I don't see? And by the way, when you said that, it made no sense to me whatsoever. But I'd be really curious what led you to see it that way. I'm just using examples now to kind of illustrate a spirit of working together and being together, grounded in this simple fact that no one, not a single one of us, sees reality as it is, and we cannot, because we are not recording devices. We are living systems. Maria?
I was just wanting to say that fits so well with this conversation yesterday about how we need to be curious with children about their experience with technology, as opposed to coming in and saying, I am right, I know what is real, and I'm here to tell you what to do. So I think that I wanted to punctuate that for me, that because you weren't here yesterday, that was a theme that ran through yesterday, and this is a beautiful connection.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, one of the things that I'm supposed to touch on this morning, I've been trying to do this but in a particular way, is what's this whole systems perspective all about? Having grown up with it, you know, from the time I first started to, well, actually even before I got to MIT as an undergraduate, I studied engineering because it was a good way to learn about systems. So it was like a lifelong obsession. I don't know, many lifetimes, who knows? But it's a crummy word. I mean, it really is a very non-evocative word. If you hear most people in everyday language use the word system, there's usually two colloquial meanings of it. They are? What do you think?
Well, I was just going to say, like, part of the system.
Yeah. Hey, look, it's not my fault. It's the stupid system. Like Kim said, we're all just part of this big system. You know, so that's often a way of people expressing of helplessness, right? That's not very helpful, right? No, we're all stuck in this big system. The other obviously common one today is technology. Hey, we got a systems problem here. We're going to need a systems expert to fix it. Neither of which is what we mean by systems thinking or systems understanding or particularly systems education. It really is about interdependence. How we kind of embrace the extraordinary level of interconnectedness or interdependence that exists amongst the living. A forest is imponderable. No one can tell you how a forest works. Or we can tell you about different aspects of it, but it's a profoundly complex system. The result of which is to produce a context or an environment or a niche for all kinds of life to go on and to thrive. Probably to get started in the right direction, you know, kind of building an intuitive and practical understanding of the word system, just start with family. Substitute the word family for system. Because for all of us, it's our kind of our archetypal system. The first place where we start to really encounter all the subtle and often quite puzzling and difficult dynamics that arise in a context of a human system or a social system. A family is a system. Many of you may be aware that one of the more interesting fields of the last 20, 30 years is the field of systems family therapy or structural family therapy, which basically says, hey, you got a kid, teenager's having difficulties, everybody focuses on the teenager. That's like just focusing on where the symptoms are strongest. But maybe what's going on with that kid has much more to do with how mom and dad interact or how things are going on in the larger family system. So I think if you can start there, then you kind of get away from the mechanical, technological, or hopeless implications of typical words system. So it's really about embracing interdependence at all levels. The social reality is an extraordinarily interdependent phenomenon. But so too is the ecosystem, the larger natural world. And today, so too is technology. I'm going to come back to that in 1 second because I want to just wrap up these opening comments with first just saying a little bit about my own, as I said, complex relationship with technology. Technology has created a web of interconnection, but we didn't need information technology to do this. The whole industrial age has created this extraordinary web of interconnection. Take any gadget, any device. You pick anything. Where did it come from? What's in it? Whose hands actually touched it? Or where was it actually put together and how? I mean, literally, we stand holding the world all the time in our hands. Where did our food come from? Who touched it? What's in it? In the food world, where I spend a lot of my time, we have a wonderful large network called the Global Sustainable Food Laboratory. It's been going for 15 years. The goal is to bring sustainable agriculture gradually into the mainstream as the primary system of agriculture worldwide. It's no small undertaking. We all know it's going to take quite a few decades. It's called chain of custody. That's the term used in the food industry. And it's just another kind of small illustration of this extraordinary interconnectedness. It's not just about IT. So it's very important to understand that. The stuff that we live with, all the stuff in our lives, has a huge footprint of interconnectedness in the world. Okay? So this systems worldview, I would say, has always been important for human beings. I don't think there's anything unique about today. In fact, once you start to appreciate the education, the really old education systems, all human societies have systems of education, right? Ways of going about rearing their young and educating or teaching them. East, west, north, south, native, contemporary, doesn't really matter. You start to realize that one of the kind of cornerstones of this in the older systems are helping kids understand interconnectedness in the social domain and particularly in the natural domain. And the forest, kind of metaphorically, or nature, more broadly, is the teacher. Now you can now maybe get a little bit of a glimpse of what I think is one of the deep issues here. So obviously we've intensified this web of interconnectedness around the world over the last last few hundred years, but particularly the last 50 years, right? So that literally the average pound of food consumed by an American has traveled 2,000 miles. So that's just a small example. It's crossed countless borders. Where I live, we have the best apples I've ever eaten in my life. Central Massachusetts, just spectacular. I go to the orchard and get them, but if I go to my grocery store, the apples come from New Zealand. That's more than 2,000 miles. So, but you might say, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of tools. I'll just say it first, and I'll kind of back up and introduce you to it as a tool, but I want you to get a little chance to practice with this. You might say there's a kind of a deep issue, which again I was kind of implying before. I want to say it explicitly now. Over the last, let's just say, few hundred years, if you drew that curve of interconnectedness, and here's what I mean by interconnectedness here, how day-to-day actions that I take affect people on the other side of the planet and vice versa. You with me? So that's a simple definition. You can define it a lot of different ways, but that's caught in the spirit of it. We are literally living in each other's backyards. You travel in northern India, all the river systems are basically dry almost all year round. Why is that? Didn't used to be. They're big canals that are mostly don't have water any time of year. Why do you think that's true? It's important to think about this. You kind of know. It's interesting that doesn't pop to your mind right away. Northern India, where do all those river systems originate? Right? you know geography. Where do the river systems in northern India, as do the two of the three large river systems in China, originate in the Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau. As the glaciers contract, the spring melt is smaller and smaller. So all these river systems, it is really one of the big issues already in India, northern India particularly, and China. Oh, and by the way, why are those glaciers contracting? Yeah, because of global warming. Oh, and by the way, why is that happening? I don't know BC very well. Where does most of your electricity come from? It's a lot of it's hydro here, right? Yeah, yeah. As an American, as a citizen of the country just south of you here, as a citizen of the United States, about 2/3 of our electricity in the country, in some parts of the country, as much as come, of course, from burning coal. So let's try to point out to people, your dry rivers in India. Because every night you plug it in to charge it. And it burns some coal. We think it's super sophisticated, all these fancy devices. And we forget that by and large, in most places in the world, the most common source of energy to run our super sophisticated devices is burning former living things in the form of coal. Doesn't sound so sophisticated now, does it? Because we don't look at the whole system. We just look at the little piece that's closest to us. Just using this to illustrate. This is literally what the discipline of systems thinking is about. How do we keep stepping back? How do we keep stepping back? How do we see the whole of our impact? I don't say this just to bum you out. It's just, we ought to tell the truth. So all this stuff on digital connectivity, let's just say the internet, okay, which is enabling so much. Oh, which, by the way, also has its roots at MIT. Probably many of you some of you have heard, but probably not most, of the World Wide Web Consortium. That's the group of people responsible for the protocols that make the internet work, based at MIT, founded by a man named Tim Berners-Lee, been operating for about 25 years. So again, I have this very complex relationship with technology. How much of the world's electricity is used by all our devices and the internet? See, that's a number we all should know. And by the way, you don't need to know the number, because probably not many of you do. In fact, I think probably nobody really does. But do you think it's growing? Yes. Generally, the electricity footprint of the internet, if you just look at the server farms alone, so that's the technology infrastructure that interconnects everything. I was having lunch with president of Google several years ago, and I just asked him. I said, "What's the electricity footprint of the internet?" And without any pause, he said, "Well, the server farms." This was about 5 years ago. The server farms are at least 5%. Now, the tough thing is add all the gadgets that are being plugged in and intermediated through those server farms. And I'm sure very conservatively, you're up to 10 to 15% of the world's electricity is to allow us to do what we do in our connected age. Probably closer to 20%. And generally growing at probably doubling every 3 years or so. It's already much greater than all the electricity for all the electrical lights in the world. So we spend much more money in terms of energy and fossil fuels to power our gadgets than to power our homes. And it's growing much more rapidly. So that's what it means to look at the larger system. And, I don't want to go into this in too much, but it's relevant here because of the sentiments and concerns that all of us here have. It is, when all is said and done, one more way the wealthy are imposing themselves on the poor. Because who is it who's using all these gadgets? It's the middle class and the rapidly growing middle class around the world, by and large. Okay? And who is it who has dry riverbeds? Who is it who has about 150 million chronically dehydrated people? Northern India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And oh, by the way, all these places with all this social turmoil. It's a big interconnected place we live in. So here's the big headline I want to just leave you with. There's actually two. One is, do you think this is relevant for education? Do you think the kids in our schools today who are living in this world today and are going to live in this increasingly interconnected world in the future need to have some ability to understand these things? Do you think it could make a big impact on how our society works and kind of navigates through the extraordinary changes that are coming? And they are coming, by the way. Please don't think that it's like they're here already. Depends what part of the world you go to. But they're definitely here already. Water is the most acute problem in the world already. You know, a little less than 1 billion people. You know, sixth of us do not have reliable access to clean drinking water today. I have one little chart from a McKinsey study synthesizing World Health Organization data that the headline of the chart is 2030, China and India unable to meet 50% of their water needs. So whether you look at climate change, you look at water, you look at topsoil, you look at the global food system, all this stuff being technologically intermediated and kind of sped up on this accelerating curve of interconnectedness. And on the other hand, our ability to understand that interconnectedness, if anything, has probably declined. Now that's really very ambiguous. No one can answer that. And you might say, well, the technology could really help that. It actually could. Is it? It's a good question. Is it already? I think the most salient thing is something was said just a couple of minutes ago. The kids today really are growing up with an awareness. You might say first generation on the planet that's actually growing up on the planet. There's this awareness of the world. I don't know about you, because many of you are educators and spend a lot more time with kids than I do. I spend as much time as I can in all kinds of conversations with younger people from middle school on up. I find that by and large they're pretty pessimistic. Or they might be excited about their gadget. And they might be excited about, we're going to just be plugged in all the time and I'll be in game land, 100% of the time. They might be excited about that kind of stuff. But if you ask them about the future of the planet, they're actually relatively pessimistic. Because they're aware of these huge imbalances. They're aware of this interconnectedness. And while the interconnectedness has gone up, our ability to understand it has, if anything, probably gone down, at least over the last few hundred years. Because our teacher, historically, to understand interconnectedness, was nature. That's how you learned. If you were an indigenous person, that's clearly how you learned. A native, or if you would say here, a First Nations person, that's how you learned. If you were living in an agrarian world, you were continually reminded that, the cycles of nature shapes our livelihood, and how we work with and build the health of our topsoil shapes our productivity of our agriculture. Way before it was all about chemicals. It was about the living system called agriculture. So, says all that has kind of declined. There were studies done, I think it's a little better today because we've had this big urban schools, school farm garden movement in the U.S. But, 10 years ago, 80% of American kids in the cities, when surveyed, thought their food came from the grocery store. They had no awareness of agriculture. Now, at least like in California, several other states, a lot of our schools have gardens. The kids actually, this is where it all comes from. That's helped a lot. But I just use that to illustrate this kind of deteriorating connection to the natural world. At the same time as we're accelerating this interconnectedness, to me is the deep source of a lot of the greatest imbalances that we all live with. Okay, last point, and then I'll stop and we'll just kind of open it up some more. The systems thinking and education movement has been going on now quietly on the sidelines. This would be a little bit, I was thinking last night of an analogy. Imagine it's like 15 years ago and no one has the term social emotional learning. But it's starting to grow. And that, a lot of educators are doing good things and gradually they're going to put these together. It's going to start to become a pretty big deal. I feel that we're like 10 years away from that in the systems education movement. Because it's been going on for about 20 years, but in little pockets. And we've been trying to build it up into something a little more visible and substantial. And one of the reasons for being here is that a lot of us feel that One of the places that would be very natural is places where there's been a big commitment to the social emotional space, because they're really three sides. This is a bad metaphor. Three sides of the same coin. Okay, you figure it out. Okay? Because the social world is a world of interconnectedness, right? Our first encounter, really, with the problematic, challenging, systemic character of the social world is friends. Building friendships. It's very complex. And obviously, our families and all the stuff we observe and experience in our families. Very, very complex. So we're immersed in this systemic reality in the social domain. And of course, there's the systemic reality of the larger living world. And there is the systemic reality of this system. So whether you talk at the individual level, the family, group, social system level, or the much larger level, guess what? It's a world of interconnectedness. The most literal translation of person from a lot of the Chinese symbols would be heart-mind system. They have to put that system in there. Because as an individual, the mind, body, heart, awareness, it's a big, complex phenomenon. So whatever level, it's all the same stuff. It's interconnectedness. Deep interconnectedness. So it should not come as a big surprise that we're actually quite good at this, innately. To me, the single biggest headline, and for me, extraordinarily significant, potentially, development from really 25 years' work of lots of pockets bringing systems thinking into education. Started off typically with high school science teachers who would study some simulation at MIT and want to create a simulation of how a cell works for their biology class and in high school science, and kind of steadily has migrated upstream. And the most interesting thing that we've learned from migrating upstream is how natural it is for kids. 4- and 5-year-olds, now even preschool kids. It kind of blows your mind that their awareness of interconnectedness. They see it, they understand it, and if given half a chance, they will cultivate that skill. So I think based on that, I think I can say, and I feel there's plenty of evidence to support this, and much, much more research that needs to be done to understand it. Human beings are systems thinkers. Nature would not have created a species fundamentally inconsistent with nature. It's not that bad. We got a lot of problems, but that's not the source. How we live is the problem, not our innate capabilities. Now, I want to stop because I don't want to talk anymore. I want to kind of open it up, and Maria and I will kind of shepherd it. I have a video which I don't think I'll even show, but I'll just describe it to you in 10 seconds. It's 2 minutes long, so it's basically 3 little boys. Kim has used this a lot. With their little map they drew after having a fight in the playground about why they're having a fight. And the little map has mean words and hurt feelings, and more mean words and more hurt feelings, then more mean words and more hurt feelings, and they're sitting around there explaining their little map.
I think show it.
Do you want to show it? Okay, all right. You got 2 minutes. I'm exaggerating. It's actually 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Okay, here we go. Okay, you can't quite see this. This is the picture of their map. So you'll hear them in just a minute, and you'll see them. So no one asked them to do this. These are 6-year-old boys, actually quite a poor school in Tucson area, where a lot of this work got started for historical reasons. And the picture says, mean words. On the left-hand side, right, you see a little box? You can't read it because it's fuzzy, I know. It says mean words. And the right-hand side, there's a little box that says hurt feelings. So their little feedback loop, which they drew on their own because they just came in from the playground having another fight, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, has mean words, hurt feelings. Okay? Now you can hear them describe it.
And our reinforcing loop is about when we get mean words, hurt feelings, mean words, hurt feelings, then we get fights, we get mean words again and hurt feelings, and then we've thought about some ways to break the loop. Starts out mean words, hurt feelings, mean words, big little fights, and hurt feelings again, and something breaks the loop.
We thought about all of our ways to to break the reinforcing loop, but we tried this. This is crossed out. We didn't really get to, well, it didn't work. That saying I'm sorry kind of worked, but we haven't tried these out yet. But the next time we get in a fight, we're going to try it.
What would the behavior over time graph look like for this reinforcing loop?
First, it would look like, so here's good for bad. It would be, and then we'd get hurt feelings and mean words. We'd keep going like this, and then one of the leverages would make us go down.
If I have hurt feelings, if I play with someone else, if that person doesn't really want to play with me, I could go ask another person.
If this reinforcing loop said nice words, hurt nice feelings, we could get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of these, and change them to something that's not bad, change it to something that's good. That will keep the loop going.
The thing is, like, whenever you have a reinforcing loop that's actually bad, you need to either find another friend or rather just think of something that can break the reinforcing loop. And if it was also a good reinforcing loop, they wouldn't, like, have all these problems.